Hi, I'm Asher, and on behalf of the Galveston Naval Museum, welcome to training on the basics of steel preservation and deck maintenance, tailored to museum ships and their unique requirements. This video is intended for museum maintenance personnel, volunteers, and management staff to be used as a guide and reference. Laid out here before me are all the tools that you'll encounter when doing proper steel preservation and deck maintenance. In this video, we're going to cover types of steel decay, coating systems, project management, and safety. So what we have here are all the tools that you're going to be tasked with using to perform a start to finish steel preservation or deck maintenance project. Starting with the manual tools, you have a chipping hammer and a wire brush. I recommend only using these tools in areas that have space requirements where you can't fit power or pneumatic tools, or for very small areas of preservation. These tools require much more time and effort and give not as good of a finished result as power tools. Moving on to power tools, your bread and butter of deck maintenance are a pneumatic scaler or needle gun, as seen here, and an angle grinder or a wire wheel. Now, for personal protective equipment or PPE, there are certain parts that must be used at all times when doing steel maintenance or preservation. Namely, eye protection, ear protection, a face mask, dust mask, or respirator, and a face shield for wire wheeling. If you're going to be doing this kind of work for an extended period of time, I strongly recommend a good pair of work gloves and knee pads. Getting started with this, your needle gun, that's going to be your first step in identifying and dealing with rust. Now, if we look here, this is a good example of the type of rust that you're going to be dealt with rectifying on a ship. American ships, especially of this vintage, are built with good quality steel, and you're not going to get massive blistering and scale on a deck. It's mostly going to be contained to smaller areas. Notice how this area, most of the worst rust is in a weld. Welds, cracks, and divots are always weak points for a coating system and a place where water and moisture can accumulate and rot the metal. It's very important for your projects to consider visitor safety. You want to make sure that all work areas are cordoned off and that visitors aren't going to be subjected to any hazards such as flying debris, dust, or excessively loud noise. So what we'll have now is our trusty assistant, my associate Conan, come on up. Conan's going to don the proper PPE required for a needle gun, and he'll show us how to use a needle gun properly. Okay, so the first step before using a needle gun is applying a few drops of a good quality air tool oil down the inlet fitting with the trigger depressed. Very good. After adding the oil, connect your air fitting. And you want to run the gun away from the work area to avoid contaminating your work area with oil. After running the gun for a few seconds away from your work area, thoroughly wipe the gun down, including the needles, to avoid contaminating your work area with oil. Okay, when you're ready to start needle gunning rust, there are a few key topics that we need to discuss before. You want to hold the gun 90 degrees perpendicular to your work area, applying only light downward pressure. You really want to guide the gun with your hand. Applying anything more than light pressure slows down the gun and can damage the needles. Avoid angling the gun unless the work area requires it, or you need to get some stubborn rust pits out from the work area. If you are angling the gun, do not apply downward pressure. You will damage the needles. Okay, so as you can see, we've started chipping. This is coming to the first phase of our needle gunning, and what we have here is an example of where a lot of the steel preservation projects unknowingly go wrong. So you can see we've removed all the major scale, like what you see here. That's been removed, and what we're left with is a dull area with rust pitting. So you'll see that the steel has corroded away into these pits, and right here in these areas there's slightly darker shades of rough rust. That's called pitting. All of this needs to be removed by a needle gun. Now, it takes a good amount of time to do this properly. You need to be very careful and go through your areas multiple times, making sure you get all of these pits clean. Now, once you've done that, you're going to be left with the surface such as this. This is what you want to see when you're done needle gunning. A slightly dull surface of metal that's completely free of any dark colored rust in these pits. Always pay special attention to welds, corners, edges, and heavy areas of pitting. This is what we want to see. So after Conan comes back and does some more needle gunning here, all of this surface will look just like this, purely from a needle gun. Okay, once you've done your needle gunning and all of your surfaces look similar to these here, a dull metal with no rust, you're ready for step 2, which is wire wheeling. Unlike the needle gun, this angle grinder with the wire wheel is an inherently dangerous tool. Great care must be taken to prevent injury while using this tool. Make sure that you still have your ear protection, your respiratory protection, and a face shield. This tool can send wire bristles flying off at a high velocity, which can cause injury. Make sure you pay special attention when wire wheeling in grooves, in tight spaces, or on an uneven surface to prevent kickback, which can also cause injury. Make sure that any loose clothing or hair is kept well away from the wire wheel. Before starting wire wheeling, make sure you have all your proper PPE and you verify the condition of the tool. Make sure the tool is in good condition, the on-off switch is functional, and do a quick check of your power cord to make sure it's undamaged. When using the tool, do not apply excessive downward pressure. Keep the wheel flat against the surface you're trying to work, unless needed to turn due to work surface or an uneven area. It's best to keep the tool flat. Keep a strong, firm grip on the wire wheel, but don't force it down into any position. It will kick back at you. Okay, so this surface here shows what a good wire-wheeled and feathered surface looks like. After cleaning, this will be ready for coating system application. Now, with the wire wheel, we want to, brighten up the steel. We want nice, bright steel with no rust or foreign debris. Another form of failure in a coating system is improper feathering. Feathering is evening the surface between your bare steel and the previous coating systems that were applied. You need to be able to run your hand over the surface and you shouldn't feel any rough edges. Imagine a gradual rise from the bare steel up to the previously existing coating. Any rough edges or areas that are improperly feathered lead to imperfections and subsequently applied marine coatings, leading to premature failure and weak points in that subsequent coating. That's to be avoided at all costs. Feathering is just as important as brightening up the bare steel. It's important after each of these steps to clean your work area. One, to prevent driving debris into the work area, which will make it harder, if not impossible, to clean later. Also, you need to be able to see your work area to get all of those rust pits and to feather and wire wheel properly. I recommend using an electric or a battery leaf blower as opposed to an air gun. Air guns and compressed air can add moisture, oil, and other contaminants to your work surface. This is a safer alternative. After blowing all the loose debris away with the leaf blower, it's important to clean this surface of any contaminants or oil, grease, the like, with an appropriate solvent. Paint thinner, mineral spirits, any solvent of that nature will suffice. It's important to use a clean rag and wipe not only the surface that you'll be applying your coating, but the surrounding area. Good quality marine coating systems are not able to work if there's any presence of dust, rust, and oil or grease. Oil and grease are extremely counterproductive to a good finished product. Make sure it's all cleaned up before applying a marine system coating. So it's important when doing a deck maintenance project that a concerted effort is put into a small area. It's very important that anything that you chip, wire wheel, or open up is covered by the end of the day or before any inclement weather or extreme humidity is experienced. What can go wrong is you spend a lot of time and effort needle gunning and wire wheeling a surface to look like this. This is ready for a marine coating. If it's left outside and exposed to the elements, even overnight, you can end up with this here. We can see that the surface is flash rusted due to moisture and water, and this will require far more effort to clean than it did initially. This will also lead to an inferior product and eventual early decay. It's best to avoid this at all costs. Make sure that any areas that were opened up are at least applied the first coating of your marine system before any inclement weather. So we're ready to move into the next phase of our steel preservation and our deck maintenance, which is a marine systems coating. Myself and the museum have no affiliation with PPG, however, that's the marine system that we use. I implore you to do some research. All of these marine systems by reputable companies are the same, all different flavors of the same food. So the way a marine system works is you have to start with a good quality product. I can't stress enough that there is no place for one part paint on the weather decks of the ship. A two-part painting system is crucial to the longevity of your painting program. This paint, if applied properly and all steps are followed, has a service life of about 5 years. This paint, when it's time to be recoated, will give a good surface, a good substrate for future layers of paint. One part paint does neither of those things. There's no place for one part paint on the weather decks of a ship. So starting with our painting system, we have a two-part 1-to-1 sealer. This sealer is your first barrier against defense with rust. This should only be used in areas that have heavy pitting, scale, or in high traffic, high service areas. You'll do one coat of this, followed by 2 coats of an epoxy 2-part primer. This 2-part primer can be applied directly over treated rust in areas that don't have heavy scale or pitting. 2 coats of an epoxy 2-part primer. Your final coat will be either a polyurethane or a pithane top coat. This is a 4-to-1 mix, meaning 4 parts of the base to 1 part cure. This is your final top coat, which provides UV resistance and a long-lasting finish for your decks and structures. This is resistant to both UV and foot traffic. A secondary non-skid abrasive material can be mixed with this paint to give you a good non-skid surface for your weather decks. This painting system is contained in one space. It's extremely important that all of your components are contained in one area, and that area is kept clean and free of any other painting system components. Only the paints that you use on your weather deck should be here. It's important that they're kept together. These are 2-part paints. The parts must stay together. A sealer or a hardener for this system will not work for a primer or top coat. You have to use the correct curing agent for the base. Now for mixing, only one person should mix paint. It's very important that the person mixing the paint has good familiarity with the system. That's because on this table here, the retail price for what you see is about $1,600. This is very expensive paint. You pay for what you get. It's important not to waste any. Also, if the directions in the technical data sheet for this system are not followed, you end up with a serious mess that takes significantly more time and energy to clean. Had it just been done properly, this is a very easy to use system that doesn't require much effort. Now mixing. I like to use small mixing cups, and it's very important that if you're using throwaway mixing cups like this, you don't contaminate the base with the curing agent or the curing agent with the base. Use one cup when mixing the base, use a new cup when mixing the cure. Throw both away when done. This here is an example of a cure, the sealer that's been cured. And you can see I've been trying to get the sealer and the paintbrush out of this bucket for a number of days, smashing it, throwing it on the ground. It will not come out. This is a good test to show how good of a product 2-part painting systems are. It's adhered so well to this plastic that the plastic is breaking around it. It's as hard as a rock. I've yet to find any 1-part system that comes anywhere near that. It's incredibly important to use good quality 2-part marine systems. If you have any questions, consult your paint representative at a good marine coating supplier. So my associate Conan is going to be mixing up a small batch of sealer. The sealer is a 1-to-1 mix. Volume of mixing this paint is no matter. The big issue is the ratio. As long as you mix this in a 1-to-1 ratio, it will work. So right now Conan is going to mix some hardener. We're going to use 1 scoop of hardener into the mixing cup, which will then be followed up by 1 scoop of equal volume of the sealer. Now notice Conan has eye protection on. These are somewhat harsh chemicals, and PPE must still be worn while mixing paint. 2-part paints do not dry by just exposure to air, and they have a very long shelf life. It's not important to have the paint cans secured, but it is important to keep them closed as to not impregnate them with debris or moisture. Make sure you're mixing paint in a well-ventilated area, as they do off-gas. Most 2-part paints don't need to be stirred until they're mixed. The sealer is one of them. It's pretty much a clear resin and needs no stirring until the 2 parts are mixed together. So as we can see, Conan has now mixed equal parts of the sealer base and the cure. Now with both the sealer and the cure in a mixing cup, he'll stir it thoroughly. You want to make sure that you get both parts thoroughly mixed to an even consistency and color. Be mindful that once the 2 parts are mixed together, the clock is ticking. You have a very finite amount of time to apply this coating system before it hardens up and becomes unusable. That looks like an even consistency there. It's recommended that these painting systems be applied by a small hot dog roller of at least 3/8 nap. However, for projects the size of ours today, a simple brush will suffice. Okay, so you followed along. We now have done our chipping, our wire wheeling and feathering. We've cleaned the area of loose debris. We've wiped it clean with thinner. We're now ready to apply our sealant, because this is a high traffic area with heavy rust pitting. This is going to be our first layer of defense against rust. Now we're not Van Gogh painting Starry Night, we're painting the decks of an old World War II ship. This doesn't have to be perfect, time is of the essence. You want to make sure that you're getting a good solid covering over all bare metal. You don't want any globs, you want to go back and thin it out. This is my technique. And just like that, it's done. Notice I paid extra attention to welds, areas of heavy pitting, and I made sure that I had good coverage. That's also why we clean with thinner outside of the area that we chipped, because inevitably we're going to paint outside of that area, and we want a good, solid, even coating of paint. Notice there aren't any globs or bubbles. I always go back and even it out. Those are the most important steps. Now we can take notice in that if this is left out and it rains, it'll be okay. As long as the surface is dry and clean and free of any contaminants, when you lay the paint down, this can be subjected to rain or moisture, and so long as it's recoated with the appropriate primer and top coat in the allotted time by the paint technical data sheet, this will give a long-lasting service life of many years. Continuing on with the steps of steel preservation and deck maintenance, we've needle gunned, we've wire wheeled, we've cleaned our surface and applied our first coat of sealer. After the sealer, you're going to spot apply your primer, as seen here. It can be spotty, you're only trying to cover up the areas that have sealer, not worried about the existing coating. You'll apply 1 coat of sealant when applied, 2 coats of primer, and then this will be followed up by a top coat. It's important to see these projects from start to completion. A concise effort is needed from start to finish. These projects cannot be left unfinished because the sealant and the primer do not have UV properties. They're not able to withstand prolonged exposure to UV. Follow your paint applicator's guide and their technical data sheets as the time period between coats. They must be followed. There is a strict window. So after you've done your spot chipping, your sealant, and your spot priming, you're left with this surface. The next step is to either pressure wash or thoroughly clean the surface, just as we did with either solvent and a pressure washer, to make sure that this entire surface that's masked out is ready for top coat. You'll apply either your Pithane or your polyurethane 2-part top coat with or without non-skid mix into the entire area that's been taped off. This is important that you keep visitor presentation in mind. You want to square off any areas when you can. We don't want any areas that are jagged or leave visitor presentation at a lower quality. That's always something you need to think about in a museum ship application. If you're a maintenance worker or volunteer watching this video for the purpose of training on deck maintenance or steel preservation, this is the conclusion of your training film. At this point, we're going to transition into the project management side of things. This is tailored mostly for museum management and people who are going to be running maintenance crews. One of the things of utmost importance as a manager when managing deck projects of steel preservation is constant supervision and guidance of your personnel, whether they be trained staff who've done this for a long period of time or new volunteers. It's critical that before each step you're doing your spot checks. Before wire wheeling, make sure that all the pitting is out of the rust spots that were needle gunned. After wire wheeling, make sure that all the metal is a bright, shiny color and it's properly faired. Certainly before applying any sort of marine system coating, ensure that the area around the surface is clear of debris, grease, oil, or any other contaminants. That is utmost importance. The systems will not work or provide good service life if any of the steps previously mentioned are not met. It's also good for volunteers or maintenance staff that have been performing this work for many years to have a second set of eyes. Even myself, who's been going to sea for many years, I appreciate someone coming and checking my work just to catch any small pits of rust or feathering areas that might need a little more attention. That's of critical importance. As we spoke about before, it's important to match your volunteers or labor forces with a job that fits their abilities. On top of supervising the quality of work, it's also important that you look out for the safety of your staff and volunteers. Make sure that frequent breaks are being taken, proper work attire and PPE is being worn, and everyone is staying hydrated and properly dressed for the elements. As a project manager at a museum ship, managing a maintenance staff, you're going to have to make decisions as to what the best course of action is to deal with steel preservation and deck maintenance. One example I want to show is when an inferior 1-part paint is used. You'll see that the system is flaking off and it's no longer properly adhered to the metal or the base coat of primer. We see we have some red primer there, and that red primer has no ability to combat UV and has been compromised and allowed rust to form. If we applied a subsequent good quality marine coating over top of this after properly chipping and wire wheeling it to good bare metal, we're still going to have the disadvantage of the substrate peeling off and not being adhered. So what do you do in this situation? Well, the correct answer is you mechanically blast this using either media or a hydroblaster. That's often not an option in a museum setting. So to deal with this, which is often seen on museum ships that have had 1-part paint used, you'll do your spot chipping. You'll chip and wire wheel any bare metal to a clean surface as we've previously shown. You'll take a scraper and scrape any loose paint off of the surface. Pressure wash or clean the surface to be painted with a good solvent. Apply a 2-part epoxy primer to the entire surface to be painted. That will encapsulate this inferior 1-part coating. After you've applied your 2 coats of marine epoxy, you'll follow it the same way you would any steel preservation project with one top coat of polyurethane or pithane to the choice of your color. As a project manager, it's of utmost importance to see projects through from start to completion. What we have here is an example of what happens to a partially finished project. We can see that at some point in the past, someone took the time and effort to spot chip this area, needle gun, and wire wheel it to bare metal, feather it, and then apply a primer. After the primer was applied, the window of reapplication of a top coat had expired, and we can see that we're left with this rot, the steel degradation. And what this has caused is, if this project had been seen through to completion, we would have a good surface. Now, instead, we have steel that's even more deteriorated than the first time it was cleaned, and now requires a whole nother steel preservation process. If this project had just been seen through 2 more layers to completion, we wouldn't have any of these issues. I can't stress enough that projects once started must have a concise effort all the way to completion. So one of the key steps in good project management is matching the abilities and capabilities of your workers to an assigned project. It's best to assign one worker to one project that has clear boundaries. As we can see behind me and around me, this is a good example of that. This is a small area that can be cordoned off for visitor safety, and one worker can be tasked with doing the preservation on bulkheads, bulwarks, the deck, and the ship's structure. You want your workers to take ownership of a single area. That's good not only for good work quality, easy boundaries, they know when and where to stop, and for future moral buy-in. When your workers can see that they've made a difference in a certain area that they've taken ownership in, that will make your job as a manager easier and promote better quality work and more of it in the future. So as we talked about before, matching your labor force to the job and task at hand is very important. You need to be able to decide what the capabilities are of your workers and volunteers, what they can do, and then what requires industrial assistance or outside help from skilled labor or contractors. This depth charge rack beside me is a good example of what's going to require help from industrial assistance, an outside contractor, or skilled labor. You'll see that there's all sorts of nooks, crannies, crevices, bends that would make this extremely time-consuming for your maintenance staff or volunteers to perform good steel preservation on. Also, with the tools available to most museum ships, you're not going to get a good quality repair, and you're not going to get the service life out of your marine coating systems with the tools that most museum ships have. To do this properly, these racks would either need to be removed, refabricated by an outside contractor, or professionally blasted, either with a hydroblaster or a media blaster, and then subsequently followed up by professional spraying of your marine 2-part system. This here would take too much time and too much effort for not a good enough result for general labor, volunteers, or your museum staff. It's important, again, to be able to size your projects and the skill required to your available labor force. Your labor force's time and effort is much more well used in smaller areas where maintenance chipping or significant chipping of flat, easy to access surfaces are needed. Another key to successful deck maintenance and steel preservation is a clear and concise schedule for maintenance workers and volunteers. Make sure that you have a clear system of when work will start, when breaks will occur, and when work will end, taking into account everyone's time and the time of day, watching the weather, making sure that everything that was opened up was covered by the close of business or before any inclement weather is expected. Make sure that you follow the windows of reapplication coating times set forth in your technical data sheet provided with the painting supplies. There's a strict window that your coatings must be put down. Make sure that's worked into your schedule. Make sure your schedule is put down and set forth, spread through all parties of the work well before it starts. At this point, we've reached the conclusion of the management side of steel preservation and deck maintenance. Some few key takeaways are all the points that we talked about before: making sure projects are finished, staying on one project to completion, Always remember that if you have any questions about any form of this, reach out. Reach out to your higher-ups at the museum. Reach out to other museums. You can also contact me by various means. If you have questions about your painting system, speak to your paint representative. Make sure that you've partnered with a good marine coating supplier and you have contacts with your paint representative. They can answer any questions you might have about proper preparation, coating application, and the type of systems that would work best for your scenario. I'd like to sincerely thank you for the time that you've taken to watch this video, and I'd like to thank you for your past and future efforts with the ship and the submarine here at the museum. My name's Asher. Please reach out to me. Thanks again. Fair winds and following seas.